All right, guys, so today I want to cover the topic of if your training really even matters, what variables matter, and a somewhat recent study that came out showing how much variability there can be between individuals and why doing what somebody else is doing might not get you the same results or even close to the same results. And like I said, really diving into what actually matters when training. So we're going to go into all of that. So I want to give credit where credit is due here. And there was a good article titled "Why Your Friend's Gym Routine Might Not Work for You." This is on Outside Online that I'm going to link below and have some screenshots in the video here. But basically they described a study that was recently published in the Journal of Applied Physiology that had 20 men going through an 8-week training program. And basically what they were trying to do here was see if there was a difference between people having just a standard progressive training program, kind of just a linear progression there, versus a variable group that had differences in their load, in the repetitions that were done, in the rest time, things like that. A lot of times, even if you looked at 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, people would talk about you have to mix it up, you have to confuse the muscles. This is still talked about today, and I think a lot of people, especially in the evidence-based community, they know that that is kind of silly, that there's no such thing as just confusing the muscle. And if anything, that is actually detrimental and can provide worse results because there's that factor of neurological adaptation. And so when you have a new exercise introduced, if you have anything really new introduced, you're going to have a period of time where you're just getting used to doing it. And so the strength gains that you appear to be making are not really due to muscular adaptations, but rather efficiency at the movements. And so I think for the most part, we can rule out the idea of muscle confusion really helping for progress here. However, there is still the notion that periodization can play a big role. That if you really have variable loads, variable rep ranges, variable rest times, and that you periodize that can have a big difference in terms of overall hypertrophy and muscle growth. So when you look at that, do we have a lot of evidence to support that? And I would say for strength, we do to some extent. And actually, I want to also point out that I realized after starting to make the idea of this video that it was also covered in MASS, Monthly Application of Strength Sport, with Greg Nuckols, Eric Helms, Mike Zordos, and now Eric Trexler. And so it's covered very well there as well. But like I said, I had already had the idea for this video, so I just wanted to go ahead with it anyway. So obviously it is getting a lot of press between that article, MASS, and now I'm putting it out myself. So like I said, when we look at strength, there is some good evidence showing that different periodization models help one get stronger than if they did not use those. But do we have a lot of evidence for hypertrophy? And really we don't. We don't see a lot of evidence that doing variable training has much of a benefit compared to just a standard linear periodization. So what they had done here, like I said, they had one group essentially. I'll link the article, so if you want to see all the details, you can see that. But basically, between the two groups, there was not really any difference in hypertrophy when using measurements. Now, the variable group did have a slight increase in muscle protein synthesis, but does that really matter? Again, at the end of the day, we only measure muscle protein synthesis in order to get an idea of overall actual muscle growth. So if we're measuring muscle growth here, that is the most important variable that we should be looking at. Now, maybe over time, instead of 8 weeks, if this was 8 months or 8 years of following this type of training, would variability increase hypertrophy more than just the linear progression? Maybe. But again, just actually looking at the measurements here, almost no significant difference at all, or really no significant difference. So one of the most important points I think that can be taken from this study, that again was also mentioned in that article, is that while there wasn't a huge variability between the different legs of the participants who had done both types of routines, there was a huge variability seen between different lifters. And so that's really important to note here, is that they might have been able to change this or that aspect of the routine, and it didn't change that much for their results. But when you look at different people, the results were drastically different. And so again, as I've emphasized in a lot of other videos and talks, is unfortunately a huge part of this does come down to genetics. And again, that's not to discourage people. You should try to maximize your potential with your genetics, but obviously this is something that is not really talked about all that much as far as the fitness community outside of the evidence-based community, right? It's constantly talking about hard work and outworking people. And so the message here is not that you don't need to work hard. If anything, it's showing that you should work hard, because in both of these groups, they were still pushing themselves hard. And so that is something that you should focus on there, is being consistent, pushing yourself consistently over time, and making sure that you are progressing. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to change your genetic potential. So if you do that for years, you will probably reach that regardless of if you're doing a perfect routine. And so that's, again, something I like to emphasize over and over, is that you have guys who are doing low volume, high intensity. You have people doing high volume, lower intensity, and everything in between, different techniques. At the end of the day, it's all going to work for most people. Yes, there are going to be certain people who really respond better to really high volumes, and vice versa. I'm not saying that nothing matters, but a lot of these details that people get caught up in, they really overemphasize how important they are. I think this can get really frustrating when you have people selling stuff, because if you are a beginner to intermediate, you might not know this. You might think, okay, well, I'm getting these results, but what if I got better results? What are these people doing to get these better results? And so you might buy into something that they're selling, thinking that it's going to give you this dramatic difference. And I know I was chasing that for a long time. I worked with 2 different trainers. I was always looking for that next routine, and I was very consistent. I was very consistent pretty much since I got started. I wasn't one to just program hop from one to the next, but I still did think like maybe there was something I was missing. And at some point you just have the realization that that really isn't true, that there's only so much that you can do. So, and a lot of people who listen to this, they know that I do train people myself. So that might make you wonder, well, then why even have a trainer? And I think that's a valid question. Why would you want to work with somebody and pay money when it doesn't really matter? And again, I'm not trying to say that nothing matters here. There's a lot that a trainer can provide. I've like I said, I've worked with a trainer several times, and I will probably work with a trainer in the future for specific goals. A trainer can often provide balance. They can provide peace of mind if you're stressing about little details. They can provide programming, which in certain circumstances, I definitely think programming is important. Obviously, there's nutritional support if you have questions for them, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's not magic. It's more of a stress relief. If you have the money for a coach, that's great. But if you don't, it's nobody's saying, or nobody should be saying, that you're not going to be able to progress, because you absolutely can. A coach can just help guide you there and maybe get you there a little bit faster. Maybe that's getting you to your potential in 5 years versus 7 years or something like that. So I hope this was helpful for you guys, both the study review and the topic itself. If you have any specific questions, feel free to post them down below. And I'd also like to hear from people who are listening to this, who have been doing this for a little while. Have you noticed huge differences in your results when you've changed your routine and nothing else? So not necessarily going from one routine to the next and adding 1,000 calories and saying, well, wow, I really blew up, but keeping things constant and changing training variables. Have you noticed that caused a huge difference for you? So go ahead and post below, let me know.